My name is Eleanor, but the people who loved me called me Nana Ellie. For 50 years I was a mother, a wife, and a grandmother. I thought that was my legacy. I baked the birthday cakes, I mended the torn knees on trousers, I saved every spare penny in a cookie tin to help with college fees. I believed that family was a fortress, built with love and loyalty. I was a fool. On the afternoon of December 23rd, my grandson Michael, whom I'd raised since he was in diapers, told me he had a surprise. "We're going for a little drive, Nana. A special pre-Christmas treat." He helped me pack a small suitcase. My hands, gnarled with arthritis, fumbled with the latch. "Just for a night or two," he said, his voice too bright, his eyes avoiding mine. A cold dread, colder than the winter air outside, began to coil in my stomach. But I trusted him. He was my boy. We didn't drive towards the twinkling lights of the city or the familiar turnoff to my sister's house. We drove into a part of town I didn't recognize, where the buildings were gray and the streets were empty. The car slowed and stopped in front of a large, grim brick building. A flickering neon sign read, "Haven Shelter." My heart stopped. "Michael? What is this? Why are we here?" He wouldn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's just for a little while, Nana. We can't manage right now. It's too much." The words didn't make sense. Manage? I'd managed everything for them my whole life. I'd managed his father's funeral. I'd managed the mortgage when Michael lost his job. I'd managed the loneliness after my husband passed. He got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old winter coat, the one with the broken zipper I'd been meaning to replace. He tossed it onto my lap through the open car door. The gesture was so casual, so final. It was the same way you discard a fast food wrapper. "Go on, Nana. They'll take care of you inside." I stepped out onto the icy pavement, my legs trembling. The cold bit through my thin house dress. I turned, my mouth open to form a question, a plea, anything. But before a sound could escape, the car door slammed. The engine revved. And just like that, the red taillights of my own car, the car I'd co-signed for, disappeared into the deepening dusk, taking my entire world with them. I stood there, a 70-year-old woman, holding a suitcase and a tattered coat, abandoned on the steps of a homeless shelter on the eve of Christmas Eve. The wind whipped at my hair, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly, completely alone. A man at the shelter door, his face a mask of weary resignation, handed me a clipboard without a word. I signed my name, Eleanor Margaret Higgins, my hand shaking so violently the signature was barely legible. I was just another name, another problem, another body to find a cot for. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. Rows of metal cots filled a large hall, each one holding a story of loss. I found an empty one near a drafty window and sat down, the cold metal seeping through my clothes. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated decision. My family, the people I had loved and nurtured, had decided I was expendable. As I lay in the semi-darkness, the sounds of the shelter became a symphony of sorrow. Coughs, snores, quiet sobs. I thought of the Christmases past, the scent of pine and gingerbread filling my home, the sound of my grandson's laughter as he tore open presents under the tree I'd decorated. I thought of the countless nights I'd stayed up, sewing costumes for school plays, helping with science projects, whispering that everything would be all right. And now there was no one to whisper that to me. A young volunteer, a girl with kind eyes, brought me a styrofoam cup of lukewarm tea. "Here you go, dear," she said. The simple kindness in her voice was so starkly different from the cold dismissal of my own flesh and blood that tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. I cried silently into the thin, rough blanket, mourning not just my comfort, but my very identity. I was no longer Nana Ellie. I was just Eleanor, cot number 17. The morning brought no relief, only a deeper, more profound shame. I lined up for breakfast, watery oatmeal and stale bread. I looked at the faces around me. An old man muttering about a son who never called. A woman clutching a faded photograph of her children. I realized with a sickening jolt that I was not unique. This room was full of cast-off parents and forgotten grandparents. We were the inconvenient, the used-up, the human collateral of busy lives. I spent the day in a haze of humiliation. I remembered teaching Michael how to tie his shoes in that very living room they had now claimed as entirely their own. I remembered the feel of his small warm hand in mine. How had that hand grown into the one that so coldly tossed a coat into my lap? Later, a group of volunteers handed out donated items. A woman smiled at me and gave me a new pair of socks and a wool hat. It was the first gift I'd received that season, and it came from a stranger. The irony was a physical pain. The family I had given my life to had given me nothing but rejection, while a complete stranger had given me a moment of warmth. That night, as I prepared for another long cold night on the cot, I reached into the pocket of my old coat, searching for a tissue. My fingers brushed against a small crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a lottery ticket. I'd bought it 3 days earlier. It was a silly habit, a little weekly ritual of hope. I'd buy one ticket, and for a day I'd dream of paying off Michael's debts, of fixing the leaky roof, of taking the whole family on a vacation. I'd forgotten all about it. Now, holding it in that shelter, it felt like a cruel joke. A symbol of all the dashed hopes and empty dreams. A worthless piece of paper for a worthless old woman. I almost crumpled it and threw it away. But something stopped me. It was the last tangible piece of my old life. The last thing I had purchased for myself with my own money from my own home. I tucked it carefully back into my pocket. It was mine and no one could take that away. The next morning, Christmas morning, the shelter was quieter than usual. A small old television was on in the common area, the volume low. Mostly, it was just background noise to the overwhelming silence of our collective grief. Needing a distraction, I found a chair nearby and sat, staring without seeing. Then the local news came on. The anchors, dressed in cheerful red, began talking about the holiday and, almost as an afterthought, the state lottery drawing. And now, for those of you dreaming of a Christmas miracle, here are the winning numbers for the $8 million jackpot. I don't know why I did it. Perhaps it was force of habit. I pulled the crumpled ticket from my pocket and smoothed it on my knee. The numbers were smudged but legible. The announcer began to read. Number 11, 2234, 41, 49, and the Powerball 07. I looked at my ticket. 11, 22, 34, 41, 49. Powerball 07. A strange calm settled over me. There was no screaming, no jumping for joy. The world seemed to slow down and become perfectly silent. I checked the numbers again. And again. They matched. Every single one. A volunteer walking past paused. Everything all right, Eleanor? You look pale. I looked up at her, my vision blurring. I couldn't speak. I just held up the tiny slip of paper. It took a moment for her to understand. Then her eyes widened. Oh my goodness. Oh my dear Lord. Her exclamation drew attention. Within minutes, the shelter staff had confirmed it. The quiet, dignified old woman in cot 17 was the sole winner of an $8 million jackpot. There was a stir of excitement, of disbelief. People I had barely spoken to came up to me, touching my arm, offering congratulations. Their happiness for me was genuine, a stark and beautiful contrast to the betrayal I had felt just hours before. In my darkest moment, it was these strangers, these fellow castaways, who showed me what real community looked like. The news vans arrived before I did. By the time a shelter supervisor drove me to the lottery claims office, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing. I still wore the same clothes from the shelter. I hadn't changed. I wanted the world to see me exactly as I was when my family discarded me. Inside, officials verified my ticket. It was real. When a reporter shoved a microphone in my face and asked how I felt, I didn't talk about the money. I feel, I said, my voice clear and steady despite the tremor in my hands, like a woman who was driven to a homeless shelter by her own grandson less than 48 hours ago. The money is a surprise. The betrayal is what I will live with forever. The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the cameras flashed with a new furious intensity. My story was no longer just about a lottery win, it was a scandal. It was a headline. That evening my face was on the local news. Grandmother abandoned, then wins millions. The story went viral. They showed my photo, they named the shelter, and it didn't take long for the public to find out the rest. The name of my grandson, Michael. His address. My address. I sat in a quiet hotel room later that night. A room I'd paid for with a credit card I'd barely used, and watched the news. And there it was. A live shot from my own street. A reporter stood in front of my house, the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house where I'd planted the rose bushes now visible in the background. And in the window I saw them. Michael, his wife, and my 2 great-grandchildren, their faces pale and stunned, staring out at the media circus on their front lawn. They were prisoners in the home I'd built, exposed to the world. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a deep, resounding quiet. The truth was out. They had tried to hide me away in the dark, and now a spotlight was shining on their cruelty for all to see. The phone in my hotel room began to ring. It was a number I knew by heart. Michael. I let it ring. It rang again. And again. Then came the text. Nana, please. We can explain. It was a mistake. Call us back. We're being harassed. I read each message, my heart a stone in my chest. The excuses, the panic, the sudden concern for their well-being. Where was this concern for me when I was standing on those shelter steps? I didn't block the number. I simply never answered. I let their calls go to voicemail. I listened to the first few. Michael's voice first pleading, then growing increasingly frantic and angry. Everyone knows, Nana. My boss saw it on the news. The neighbors won't talk to us. You have to tell them it's not true. You have to come home and fix this. Fix this. He still didn't understand. He hadn't broken a vase that could be glued back together. He had shattered a lifetime of trust. There was no fixing it. His wife left a message, her voice shrill. That money is family money, Eleanor. You can't just keep it for yourself. After all we've done for you. I almost laughed. What had they done for me? They had taken my home, my security, and my dignity. And now they felt entitled to my miracle. Their punishment was not something I had to orchestrate. It was unfolding naturally, a consequence broadcast on live television. Their reputation was in ruins. Their comfortable life, built on the foundation of my labor and love, was crumbling under the weight of public shame. My silence was my most powerful weapon. It forced them to sit alone in the house of their own making, listening to the echoes of their betrayal. With the money I didn't seek revenge. I sought peace. I bought a small, cozy cottage by a lake, far from the city and the memories. I woke up to the sound of birds, not the sounds of a shelter. The silence here was healing, not lonely. The first thing I did, once the funds cleared, was go back to the Haven shelter. I didn't arrive in a limousine. I asked a friend to drive me. I walked in and found the director. I wrote a check that made her gasp. It was enough to renovate the entire facility, install proper heating, hire a full-time nurse, and ensure that no one would ever be turned away due to lack of space or resources. I set up a foundation in my name, the Eleanor Higgins Foundation, to help other seniors facing poverty and abandonment. I paid for medication, home repairs, and legal aid for those who, like me, had been cast aside. I found a purpose that was bigger than my pain. Helping others heal began to heal me. The anger slowly dissolved, replaced by a quiet strength. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt myself into someone new. Someone who was defined not by her family, but by her own resilience and capacity for compassion. Years have passed now. My life is simple and full in ways I never imagined possible. I have friends. I have my garden. I have the profound peace that comes from knowing you are the architect of your own happiness. I heard through the grapevine that Michael and his family never recovered socially. They lost the house eventually. They moved to another state, but these stories have a way of following you. The digital footprint is permanent. I don't know where they are now, and I don't wish to know. I have forgiven them not for their sake but for my own. Carrying the weight of hatred is too heavy for an old woman's shoulders. They thought they were leaving me with nothing on that cold December night. But they were wrong. They left me with the one thing that could truly set me free. The shocking, clarifying truth of who they really were. And in losing them, I found myself. Every Christmas, I still hang a wreath on my door. I bake a batch of my famous gingerbread cookies. And I deliver them, along with a generous donation, to the shelter that was my brief home. I look into the eyes of the people there, and I see the fear and the shame I once felt. And I tell them, my voice soft but firm, this is not the end of your story. Your miracle is still out there. And sometimes, it's waiting for you in your own pocket. My first Christmas in the lakeside cottage was a study in quiet contrasts. The previous year, I had been on a metal cot. This year, I was in a soft armchair by a crackling fire. I'd bought a small live tree and decorated it simply with a single string of lights and a few hand-blown glass ornaments I'd found at a local market. There were no piles of presents, no chaotic family dinners. Just the soft hiss of the fire and the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore outside. I baked a single-person portion of my traditional gingerbread. The scent, which usually filled an entire house, now felt almost too potent for the small space. For a moment, a wave of profound loneliness threatened to pull me under. I missed the noise, the chaos, the warm, heavy weight of a grandchild on my lap. But then I looked around. This was my sanctuary. Every item in the cottage was chosen by me for me. There was no one here to make me feel like a burden. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful. I raised my cup of tea in a silent toast. To survival, I whispered to the quiet room. And for the first time I truly felt like I was celebrating. In the spring I received a letter. It was from a woman named Irene, who was 78 years old and living in a dilapidated mobile home. Her roof leaked, and her son, who lived across the country, sent her a small check each month but never visited. She'd heard about my foundation from a social worker. My foundation's first official act was to completely re-roof Irene's home. I didn't just send a check. I went to visit her. We sat in her tiny kitchen drinking tea and she cried. They weren't tears of joy for the new roof, but tears of relief that someone saw her. That she wasn't invisible. Leaving her home that day, I felt a sense of purpose so strong it was almost dizzying. This was my new family, not bound by blood, but by a shared understanding of struggle and the simple, powerful need for dignity in our later years. One afternoon in late summer, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my gravel driveway. My heart hammered for a moment, a foolish, fleeting hope that it was Michael come to his senses. But the woman who got out was a stranger, though her face was vaguely familiar. It was Sarah, Michael's wife's mother. We had only met a handful of times at large family gatherings. She looked uncomfortable, holding a bakery box as if it were a shield. "Eleanor," she said, her voice tight. I was in the area. I invited her in, my politeness a well-practiced habit. She sat on the edge of my sofa, her eyes taking in the simple, comfortable room. I wanted to say that what happened was awful, she began, not meeting my gaze. But you have to understand they were under so much pressure. Financially. With the kids. I listened, saying nothing. She was here to mitigate their guilt, to spread the blame, to make me see their side. The media attention. It destroyed them, Eleanor. Michael lost his job. They had to move. The children were teased mercilessly. I finally spoke, my voice calm. "Sarah, do you know what the worst part of that night was? It wasn't the cold. It was the moment I realized that the little boy I taught to ride a bike saw me as a problem to be solved by dumping me on the street. The financial pressure you speak of? I paid off their credit card debt 2 years ago. The pressure they were under? I was their pressure relief valve, and when they thought I was empty, they threw me away." She left soon after, the bakery box untouched on my coffee table. Her visit only solidified my resolve. They were still the same people, just in a less comfortable situation. They were sorry for the consequences, not for the action. The Eleanor Higgins Foundation began to gain local recognition. I was asked to speak at a community event about senior isolation. I stood at the podium, a 71-year-old woman who had been to hell and back, and I told my story without bitterness, focusing on the solution, not the pain. After the talk, a young journalist approached me. "Mrs. Higgins," she said, "your story is incredible. It's a lesson in resilience. But can I ask, do you ever worry that your foundation and your own story will forever tie your name to this tragedy?" I smiled. "My dear," I said, "for years my name was tied to being Michael's grandmother or a burden. Now my name is tied to a warm bed for a cold night, a fixed roof for a leaking home, and a hot meal for someone who is hungry. If that is my legacy, then I am perfectly at peace with it." My name was no longer a reminder of what was done to me. It had become a promise of help for others. 2 years after the lottery win, I was visiting a new community center the foundation had helped fund. As I was leaving, I saw a man stocking shelves at a grocery store across the street. He had his back to me, but I knew the slope of his shoulders. It was Michael. He looked older, worn down. His clothes were simple. He was just a man doing a job. There was no sign of his wife or children. I stood there for a long minute watching my grandson. I felt a complex swirl of emotions. A mother's pang of sadness for his struggle, a grandmother's ache for the lost boy, and the cold, hard recognition of the stranger he had become. I didn't approach him. I didn't call his name. What would I say? Any words would be either a weapon or a lie. Some chasms are too wide to cross. I got into my car and drove away, leaving him to his life, as he had left me to what he thought would be my end. The foundation received a donation. It wasn't large, but it was significant. It was from Arthur, the old man who had been mumbling to himself in the shelter the morning I'd won the lottery. The note, written in a shaky hand, simply read, "Got back on my feet. My daughter and I reconciled. Paying it forward. Thank you for the hope, Arthur." I framed that note and put it in my office. It was more valuable to me than the giant lottery check. It was proof that change was possible, that healing could happen, and that the kindness we put into the world creates ripples we may never see, but that always find their way back. I had a dream one night. I was in my old house, but it was empty. No furniture, no pictures on the walls. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. I was walking from room to room, not with sadness, but with a sense of quiet finality. I was saying goodbye. In the dream, I didn't feel angry or hurt. I just felt done. I woke up with a sense of profound lightness. The ghost of that house, the ghost of that life had finally left me. The past no longer had its hooks in me. The money had given me security, but this feeling, this was true wealth. It was the wealth of a spirit that had finished its grieving and was ready to live entirely in the present. A local high school asked if I would speak to their students for a life skills class. They wanted me to talk about financial literacy. I agreed, but I had a different lesson in mind. I stood in front of a classroom of 16-year-olds and told them my story. I didn't focus on the lottery. I focused on the betrayal. I talked about the danger of tying your entire self-worth to your usefulness to others. I spoke about the importance of building your own inner foundation, so that no matter what life or your family takes from you, they can never take you. Afterward, a young girl with sharp, intelligent eyes came up to me. "My grandma lives with us," she said quietly. "Sometimes my mom gets so frustrated with her. I'm going to go home today and just sit with her. Thank you." In that moment, I felt that my pain had not been in vain. If my story could change the dynamic in even one household, could bring a moment of patience to one frustrated daughter, and a moment of companionship to one lonely grandmother, then every terrible moment of that Christmas Eve was worth it. I developed new rituals. Every Sunday I call Irene, the first recipient of my foundation's help, and we talk for an hour. Every Tuesday I volunteer at the local library, reading stories to toddlers. Their unconditional affection is a balm. On the anniversary of the day I was left at the shelter, I don't mourn. I celebrate. I call it my rebirth day. I treat myself to a fancy lunch, buy a new book, and make a special donation. I have reclaimed that date. It is no longer a day of abandonment. It is the day I was set on the path to my true self. A lawyer sat in my cottage, going over my updated will. The bulk of my estate, including the ongoing funds for the foundation, would be left in a trust to ensure it continued its work in perpetuity. He asked, "And for your personal effects, Mrs. Higgins? For your grandson?" I looked out the window at the serene lake. "I have no grandson," I said, my voice even and calm. "My legacy is not for him. My legacy is for the Arthurs and Irenes of the world, the ones who need a hand up, not a handout from a family that never truly valued them." Signing those papers was the final act of my reclamation. I was consciously, deliberately, and peacefully choosing my own family and my own future. Now, at 74, my life is full in a way I never could have imagined. The sharp edges of the pain have been worn smooth by time and purpose. The foundation is thriving, helping hundreds of seniors each year. I have a small, close-knit group of friends who know my story and love me for my strength, not in spite of my past. I sometimes think about Michael and his family. I hope for their sake that they found some measure of peace. But their journey is no longer my concern. My energy is reserved for the living, for the people right in front of me who need help today. The greatest victory was not the lottery win. It wasn't the public shaming of my family. It was this, the quiet, steadfast joy of a life lived on my own terms. It was the ability to look in the mirror and see not a victim but a victor. It was the peace that comes from knowing that the last chapters of my life are the best ones, written by my own hand. So this is my story. A story of a love that turned to betrayal, of a darkness that was shattered by an impossible stroke of luck. But more than that, it is a story of transformation. They thought they were discarding a used-up old woman, but they were actually planting a seed in barren soil. The seed of my own survival, nurtured by the kindness of strangers and my own stubborn will to live. It grew into something strong, beautiful, and enduring. The final truth I want to leave you with is this. Your value is not determined by how others treat you. Your strength is not measured by how much you can carry for others, but by how you stand when you are left with nothing. And your story is never ever over until you decide it is. If you are in your own dark night, hold on. Your miracle may not come in the form of a lottery ticket. It may come as a kind word, a new friend, a sudden insight, or simply the dawning realization of your own incredible strength. But it will come. Just have the courage to be there to meet it.